What would your administration look like if you were becoming mayor for the first time? And if you were being reelected, how would your administration change? Who would the people be? Who would the faces be of your administration in the next 4 years? Mr. Alexander?
Well, we would start off with a new superintendent for public schools. I have a couple of people in mind, but I can't throw out their names until after I win the primary. I don't think it'd be fair to them, you know.
It's okay with us.
Sure. We're going to have a new police chief and also a new attorney general and a new CFO.
Police chief is on the force now?
A new police chief may be on the force. I have nothing wrong with doing an internal, external interview process. But there is a gentleman by the name of Richard Pennington that I had the fortunate opportunity of covering when I was a television news reporter. He used to be here in Washington, D.C., but he left here to be chief of police in New Orleans. And then from there, he went to Atlanta. He did great work in New Orleans. Unfortunately, he was there long before Katrina. I wish he was there during Katrina. But the point is that I would love to bring him back here to head up the police department. As far as the CFO is concerned, we're going to do a national search. We need a top flight person. And as far as the school superintendent is concerned, this is very important. I want to go back to that because we invest on the back end of public education. And when I say the back end, we spend $29,000 a year incarcerating young people, but we spend $15,000 a year educating young people. I have nothing personal against Michelle Rhee. I've only met her once, and I think she's done an admirable job in the time that she's been there. But the point is that when you attack a problem on the back end, that problem never really gets addressed. You're only feeding the prison industrial complex by attacking it on the back end. What I would like to do is bring in a superintendent who has a background in creating an environment that produces excellence in an challenging urban environment like Washington, D.C. We've got to, I cannot stress how important this is, but we've got to break this poverty cycle, because all it does is feed our kids into the prison complex. We've got to make sure people are literate, we've got to make sure people are trained, and we've got to protect jobs. And when I say protecting jobs, I always talk about employment verification. There are 13 states around the country that use employment verification around the country. All it does is make sure that no illegal immigrants are allowed to work in your jurisdiction. You're not really, all you're doing is protecting your job supply for Washingtonians. And there's nothing wrong with that. We have record unemployment here in D.C., and it's caused because employers have found a way to exploit a group of people, pay them pennies on the dollar, as opposed to paying a fair living wage to Washingtonians. And I've witnessed this firsthand by going to a construction site up on Georgia Avenue where they're paying journeyman plumbers $35 an hour, but they only have one. The rest of them are undocumented illegal aliens. They're making $7 to $10 an hour. Now, how is that good for Washingtonian families, our economy, our crime rate, and also our achievement gap? These things have to be addressed, and those are tough issues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alexander. Mr. Fenty, what specific changes would we see in a second Fenty term?
Well, interesting. One of the things that doesn't get written a lot about our administration is that we've probably got the longest continuous serving core administration in a long, long time in the city. The chief of police, the fire chief, our city administrators, the second one, but he was here as deputy mayor, same with our deputy mayor, our procurement chief, human resources chief. So we not only have great excellence in people like Harry Trigoning, our Office of Planning Director, but we're getting great continuity. It's one of the reasons why we've been able to manage the government so successfully. Don't forget, even my most critical poll says 65% of the people think that we've moved the city forward over the past 4 years. Now, the two candidates for chief nitpicker will say, we're going to fire the attorney general, or we're going to fire the school's chancellor. Another one will say, we're not going to make a decision on the school's chancellor because we don't make decisions before the campaign, although he's already made the decision about the attorney general. Or we're going to fire the police chief. Or over here, the president of the Fraternal Order of Police, who's supporting my opponent, is saying, we want him to get rid of the chief of police. The fact of the matter is, these are public servants who are doing a fantastic job. You're talking about, in our Attorney General's office, a record number of cases that the court used to oversee that we're getting out of. In our police department, willing to make tough decisions about putting police in the streets, about reforming the detective squad so that 4 years later our homicide closure rate is 20 points above the national average. We already talked about the great homicide reduction or who can say enough about the great work in the school system. I'm waiting to hear, what still needs to be said about the work of Michelle Rhee, the greatest test score improvement in a 3-year period that the country has ever seen. Could you imagine 4 years ago our school system even competing for Race to the Top dollars, let alone winning a national competition amongst every other state? What you are hearing is the same lack of tough decision-making and leadership. I like my opponent, but let's face it, he's had his chance to manage. As the director of the Department of Human Services from 1991 to 1995, you saw what happened. The Washington Post wrote about it yesterday. Millions of dollars overspent. The division director is not appointed in HIV and AIDS. Not going with 14 consent decrees before the court when he took over, 16 consent decrees when he left the agency. Literally losing track of the kids in the child welfare system. We don't need to go back. We need to remain in this time where agency directors are competent, when they stay in the government and they get things done, making D.C. a model for other jurisdictions to follow. It's easy to criticize and point the finger. The tough thing is to lead a city, especially during a financial crisis like we have for 4 years. We need your support for re-election.
Thank you, Mayor Fenty. Chairman Gray?
Thank you very much. I think, Mr. Mayor, as you often do, you simply regurgitate whatever they give you to read. And
That was in the Washington Post.
Well, can I finish now? Well, maybe you read it there. You simply regurgitate what your staff give you to read. Let me just call one thing to your attention. The issue around children in the foster care system was identified by the mayor that I worked for. She called the press conference to address that. It was something that had been left over from a previous administration, and we actually solved the problem. It was not created by her administration or by my administration, and you'll be well advised to get your facts straight before you start talking about those kinds of things. I'm not prepared to name a lot of people today, who I would name, but there are people who I want to, who would bring certain qualities. They would have to be open, they'd have to be transparent, they would have to be collaborative, they would have to be community-oriented, willing to work with people, and frankly, people who would work hard to hire residents of the District of Columbia. We have to be the only jurisdiction in America that unfortunately sits here today and says that 70% of the people who work in the District of Columbia are people who do not live in the city, which means that those tax dollars then walk out of the city every day because we don't have the authority to be able to tax income at its source. We're not going to get that authority anytime soon, even though we want to work harder to bring an assertive effort to winning more autonomy for this city around legislative autonomy, around budget autonomy, and frankly, ultimately, I hope, a statehood for the city. But in the near term, the way to capture those tax dollars is to hire people who live in the District of Columbia. And frankly, I have said, and I'll say again today, that we need a new Attorney General in the District of Columbia, because the Attorney General's job is to represent the people of the District of Columbia, not the mayor of the District of Columbia. The final straw for me, and if I could take that vote back to confirm him, I absolutely would. The final straw for me was when he went out and negotiated with the mayor's cronies on those contracts over involving the DPR construction, negotiated a settlement with them while an active investigation was going on by the Council of the District of Columbia to try to get fully at the facts. That was unconscionable. It was not a way to represent the people of the District of Columbia. We need somebody who will represent the citizens in this city, look out for the best interests of the citizens of this city, and frankly, that's why I will appoint a new Attorney General who represents the people and not the mayor of the District of Columbia.
Thank you, Chairman Gray. We're going to have closing arguments, and for closing statements,